Welcome back to the Destination Dream Job podcast. Today, I would like to welcome Matthew Sorensen. He is a former executive recruiter, search firm owner, and two-time director of talent acquisition. Today, he's an interview coach and host of the Job Interview Experience podcast, where he shares insights and innovative strategies to help listeners prepare for a better career. Thank you so much for joining me today.
I wrote the two-time director of talent acquisition, and I always am reluctant because it's like a two-timer. I was a two-timer. Was I a director of talent acquisition once and I two-timed them, or have I been a director of talent acquisition twice? So I haven't quite. I always try and be concise, and I haven't quite figured out how to word that yet. So thank you for that kind introduction.
Yeah, no problem. I'm really excited to talk about interviews. I do a lot of interview coaching, so I'm going to bring, a lot of the questions that I get asked and we can, discuss them together. So, the biggest question that I usually notice is what is a typical interview process? People are seeing everything from 2 interviews to 9 interviews. So I was just wondering if you have seen a trend, how many interviews are typical in the industry, in really across industries, and yeah, any insight you can provide us with that.
My observation and data is that companies are obviously getting more and more applications. We're recording this in early-ish to 2025. I think that's been the case for a couple of years now, really, and it's growing. The more applications they're getting, the more interviews they're doing, and actually the more interviews with individuals they are doing. So the process is getting longer. To me, it's a signal of insecurity and a bad process. You don't want to hire someone during the first interview. I think it's unfair to the candidate and the company. It's just moving a little too quick. I think there's probably a little wisdom in pumping the brakes, just getting to know each other, making sure that everything's out of the way. However, I talk to people, they're on interview 6 and interview 9, and it like make up your minds, people. Like if I was part of that company, I'd probably be I wouldn't be screaming, but I want to be screaming. Like they've met basically you've met everybody at this 2,000 person company at this point. Do you like this person or not? And it's hard to make decisions. You have to just choose wisely. And now companies have the right, or not, I'm sorry, not the right. They have the ability to string along candidates because it's an employer's market. So they don't have to move as fast. Back when I was doing talent acquisition, especially in the mid 2010s, we had to move fast because a lot of these people, if we didn't hire them within a week max, someone else would. So you got to be quick, and you have to decide right because it's hard to find the next person, right? So you don't want to have turnover. So to sum up your question, the process is getting longer. I think technology is making it easier to have a longer process. I also think it's a big mistake for the companies, and at the very least, clarify at the beginning, like, hey, we have a crazy long process. We like put it out on the job description so people know what they're getting themselves into. Otherwise, just refine your process.
Yeah, I think those really extremely long processes are just frustrating for the job seekers as well, because, especially if you're employed or equally if you're unemployed and you're like, oh, this is going so well, I keep getting called back, and you go for 9 hours of interviews and then get a no, like that's just a lot of time spent on something that they could have been, putting into the job search or in the networking side of things.
Yeah. And, the piece of advice along with that, if you find yourself in that process, do not stop applying for 2 reasons. One, obviously, you want to have what we call in sales a pipeline for your job search, but also you will behave differently as you go along in that process. The further along you get, when you don't have a backup plan or other interests in you, your level of desperation that the company might sense on you because this has to work out, right? You will not perform the way that you want to because you will have all of your eggs in one basket. So that's just to relieve pressure from you and to give you a little bit of swagger in your interviews. I'm not saying you tell them, hey, everyone wants to talk to me. I got so many interviews, I got to go. But just that self-confidence of companies replying to you, or even just knowing that this isn't the only, this isn't the one, this company's not your one true love. There are many true loves out there, and you'll work many places. So instead of getting tunnel vision, like just keep applying. If psychologically the company that is interviewing can sense it that they are your one and only, and you don't want them to sense that.
I always cringe when people tell me, I have one job that I want to apply for, and I'm like, well, According to the numbers and the odds, the chances are you're not going to get that one position. So keep applying and make sure that you keep your options open. But yes, sometimes people definitely feel that way. Typically the first question that people get asked in an interview is tell me about yourself, and everyone hates that question. What do you feel is the best way to answer that question?
You should start at the very end of your resume and reread every single word on it to the recruiter, probably 45 minutes or so. And that's the best way to respond that I've seen people respond to that question. It's the most effective way of making a first impression.
I'm assuming that's a joke.
That is a joke. So I've interviewed thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people. I've sat in interviews where I didn't interview. I've been the person interviewing people as an executive recruiter, as a director of talent acquisition, as everything in between. So I have a lot of data points. I've seen this happen a lot. When I do interview coaching, what's interesting is this is probably my favorite question to coach
Hmm.
on. And this is the question that I see executives and people who are further along in their career actually mess up the most. I think a lot of it is just a lack of practice a little bit, and it's hard to talk about yourself. So people default to the resume reading, or they're rightfully proud of their career. And so they kind of want to like tell, the story, like this is their novel, right?
Hmm.
Uh, did you ask the best way to answer it or the worst way? I think you asked the best way, so I should
Yeah.
probably switch gears here. I like to keep this really short, make it a movie teaser, not even the trailer. People want to give the whole movie. They want to data dump their whole resume because part of it also is just nerves. They're nervous. It's like if I tell them everything, there's no more questions to ask. Maybe we can just be done with this and they'll like me. I like to keep it really short. I have a formula for doing that to kind of give them the goods and basically pitch the ball back to them, right? Put the ball back in their court as quickly as possible. It starts the interview with really good energy, and there's just one more way to stand out from everyone else that's going to show up and interview for that role, and they're going to give 5 to 7 minute answers, and it's going to be reading the resume back, which by the way, the recruiter has in front of them. So you don't need to tell them really much at all from your resume unless they request you to. Like, and I've never seen that. Like, hey, can you tell me what page 2, job 3 is on your resume? I need to know what that is. I don't. So yeah, avoid the resume reread. Create a structure, follow that, and keep it really short, just like a cover letter. However long your answer is, cut it in half, and then cut that in half. If you can do 30 seconds to a minute, I think that's perfect.
Mhm. Okay, yeah, I was interested to hear your length of question because I've often heard like 3 to 4 minutes for the tell me about yourself, and then I've heard 2 minutes is the sweet spot. So I like to hear that you say shorter is better. So you just focus really on like how you can make an impact in that for that job, and then do it in that like quick time frame. Is that kind of and then ask questions to kind of bring it back to the room?
If they ask you to tell them about your last job or your first job, tell them about that. They're asking you to tell them about yourself, which is probably the only chance you're going to be able to get a little personal. And not when I say personal, I don't mean personal. I mean tell them a healthy hobby. Tell them a piece of volunteer work you do. If you have a family, tell them how much you love your family. Tell them what you like to do with your kids briefly, right? We like
Hmm.
to go on walks, especially on cold days, because the fresh air makes us all feel better, right? Or I am a competitive roller skater because it's a way for me to burn stress from work and keep my heart healthy, whatever. So like boom, 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 boom. Then tell them why you're there. Uh, I applied to this role, or we're here today because the challenge that you have in this marketing role that you're adding to the company or that you're growing into or whatever, there's some huge challenges here, but I've also identified the opportunities that your company has, and I know how to capture that. That's what I've done in my last 3 jobs, and that's what I'm excited to talk to you about today.
That's super interesting. I was listening to this, I think it was a podcast or like a YouTube video. I'm not 100% sure, so I'm not going to be able to quote where it came from. But they were talking about how, people in North America, if they're like, tell me about yourself, people are like, oh, well, this is what I do for work. And
Yep.
that's what they talk about. And that's like their identity. But in different parts of the world, they're like, tell me about like, what do you do for fun? Or tell me about yourself. And they're like, oh, well, I go for walks with my dog and I like enjoy spending time with my family. And so it's an interesting, different dynamic based on like North America. We really focus a lot on the hustle culture and, success and different things like that. Whereas in other cultures, success is viewed a lot differently. And so I thought that was really interesting. And that kind of brings it to your point. Tell me about yourself doesn't always have to mean sharing something about work.
Yeah, and they're asking, like I said, so that to me that gives you permission to tell them. They don't probably really deeply care. Maybe if it's a small company and they're super excited to meet you, but for the most part, you've got a resume and a job title, right? So why, rightfully so, why would they be like, oh, I'm so passionate about hearing this guy's hobbies? But there's some sneaky things in my system of doing it. One of them is ways to anchor yourself. So if you've ever interviewed 5 to 10 people a day, 5 days a week, you lose track of who's who. It's like the blue resume, but then you start saying, even with the other hiring managers, was it the gal that breeds parrots, or was it the person with the NASCAR tattoo on their fist or whatever, right? Those are good things. You don't want to have something weird, right? But if it can be like, is it the person who did the Appalachian Trail, or, that makes their own pecan pies, those little things, it's just going a little bit outside of the norm. And I like to go on walks and I like to do this, right? That doesn't stick much. So you're
Mm.
creating a couple things that stick. When you talk about the healthy hobbies, companies like hiring people that are healthy or try and be active, right? And then you add in a little volunteer work to show cultural alignment, to show that you give back, which you should. People say leaders give back. Everyone should give back and get involved. The younger you are, the more time you have to do so and make an impact. And certainly, if you have the ability to give back, like physically or with your time or whatever else, like I think you owe it because someone else has probably helped you to get wherever you are. So
Mhm.
that's my formula, and always tell them why you're there in a humble way. But I applied
Mhm.
because, or we're here because, and just tell them your conviction. Tell it like it's something that you are doing as a favor. Like if your neighbor's house is on fire, you're like, I'm here with a bucket of water because like your gazebo is on fire in the back, right? Like you say it like that, not like, I think, this, I applied because this place is really close to where I live, love the neighborhood, and my friend works here. Oh, and by the way, like the benefits here are really good for you guys, right? Like that doesn't do anything for anybody. Tell them that you
Yeah.
understand the role and you have a solution for it.
Yes, I've had a lot of clients who don't do that research in the organization before they show up, and then they're like, "So, why did you apply to this job?" And they're like, deer in headlights kind of look, it's a paycheck or whatever."
Yeah.
And so definitely doing that research and finding at least one thing that you can anchor and that you could be like, I could be excited about this one thing, even if it is just for a paycheck, finding that one thing can help a lot.
You shouldn't have asked me that question right away because I just get this like huge surge of energy. I'm like, yes, let's talk about this for 4 hours. I could talk about that question.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's an important one. It's that first impression you bring into the interview. So I get it. But I will ask you, I want to move on to, the behavioral type questions. It's really important that we can, share those stories and really make sure that we anchor our behavioral questions to what the hiring manager is looking for. So how can you help people shift from just being the job seeker who's like, please give me a job, to being the solution that the company really wants to see?
Yeah, so with the solution mindset, we kind of both you and I talked about it a little bit. You see a lot of people who, at the very least, they say, I'm on the job search because, and it can get really ridiculous. Like, I want to live in New York, or LA is so cool, that's why I applied here. And those things are all true. And to be honest, they're perfectly fine. Like, the only reason I've ever worked, like, I've enjoyed every job I've had. I've loved it. But also, like, we have to make a living. Like, I pay bills. I like to eat. I like to not sleep outside. So, like, I get it. You get it. Like, those reasons are fine. But the company didn't have a meeting. And I've been on being in several talent acquisition leadership positions. I'm in those meetings. They don't sit around and say, "Hey, how can we make someone's day?" I wonder if anyone is just within 15 minutes of us that would just like a place to go that's nice and close by, right? They have either a problem or an opportunity. That's why the job is open. It could be they had to fire somebody. Maybe somebody was naughty. They might be because someone got promoted within the company. Maybe somebody left, right? Those could be bad reasons. Or maybe they got a new client and they're growing, or they're just growing in general. Could be a new contract, maybe they needed new technology, right? We finally need someone to do this. We're finally big enough to need an accountant to move away from the you know, employee number one has been doing our books for 15 years. Time to stop that. So it could be all kinds of things, but there is a problem or an opportunity. And so instead of being an applicant, I think you can approach it as being a solution. And the most impactful part of that is actually during your application, because that completely changes the tone of your cover letter and even your summary on your resume. It can be a big picture of what you do. I help companies with my marketing skills uh, speak a language that this niche speaks, and I know exactly how to word things to connect with them. Or it could be with the technology changes coming up here. There are four huge hurdles that I've identified your company are going to face in the next 24 months. However, I have crossed every one of those hurdles. I know exactly how to navigate these rough waters, and once we get through them, the opportunities for XYZ Core are enormous. I applied because I know how to do this, and I can't wait to apply the specific skills I've developed over the last 3 years to get us there together. That's the mindset of behaving as a solution, and then that should get you the interview, right? It should help a lot if they see that. It's really hard to ignore. It says so many little things at once. First off, it's like, so a bunch of people applied because they think Apple's really cool. This person applied because they know exactly what our departments go like. How did they know that, right? How did that tiny little challenge that we have that's next year or 5 years, right? An international market or a new law or regulation or lack of a battery resource. It could be so many things. How did they know that? So that then you're not an applicant, you're almost a consultant, right? You're a solution. You can help them get through it. People like to talk with people who know how to solve their problem. It's like when we have friends that say work in construction, and it's like, hey, I'm thinking about building a deck, or well, I've got this problem, or I got this squeaky thing. Like when you have a friend who has answers to your questions, that has this like a solution, you really like talking to them about the challenge that you have, getting their ideas. You want to keep talking to them about it. You almost feel bad because it's like, I want to have these friends over to talk and hang out and catch up, but I also can't wait to pick their brain about how to do this. You become that. I've seen that happen, and I've interviewed people like that many times. And they're the people that you start like looking at the other hiring managers like, yeah, like we're gonna offer, like this person can't take another job. Like we'll go fight the other company to stop them. And then in the interview, to hopefully circle back to your question, this you don't want to ignore questions that a company asks, right? If they say, tell me about a time this, or how would you handle this situation? Again, you tie this in. You say the why and because. Why, instead of saying, if you saw two people fighting over a decision or whatever, how do you handle it? Instead of saying, well, and this is a good answer, by the way, but instead of saying, well, I'd follow the handbook policies and make sure I align with the values and, hear each person out. As a solution, you say, well, typically these things start because of this. Or what I've witnessed is when people are fighting about this type of thing, the root cause is typically this. So first off, we can't avoid these things 100% of the time, but let's talk about why they start, because if we don't understand that, it's just going to happen over and over, and we can be the best conflict resolution manager on earth, but it's not going to stop that. So let's get this covered first, and then here's how I'd handle it in the moment. I would handle it with the company's goals in mind. How can this impact other, and so on and so forth. So it's looking at things and almost talking with them as, I like to say, as a consultant and a solution at the same time. So you think of yourself as a consultant, and what do consultants do? Well, good ones that don't charge you a bunch of money for I don't know what. But what do? They immediately understand the problem, and they bring in an outside perspective on how to solve it.
Interesting. So you're kind of taking that step back before you answer the behavioral question. So like you're instead of just answering it as is, you're like, this is, going back to in my experience, this is how these situations get started, and then this is how I've dealt with it in the past, or however else you want to handle it. That's really, really interesting. But I know that everyone is going to have the question, I want to address hurdles in my resume and cover letter, but how do I know what their hurdles are? Is there a way to figure that out? I know, like, let's say all they have is the job description, they don't know anyone at the company. How can they kind of start to identify those hurdles in order to address them in the resume and cover letter?
I'm really glad you asked because that part of the process actually strengthens your entire job search. So to go back to what it is, what you don't want to do is say, "Hey, I know how to solve everything. I figure, you guys have all these problems. I figured it out, right?" You're kind of like, "You're dumb. I'm coming in with this," right? So this takes tact, but it also, you could, for people who are listening who maybe are earlier in their career, people who are further along, probably they're typically going to know if you've been a marketing leader for 15 years or a chief revenue officer for 10 years or whatever. You're going to have a good idea. Like, I don't think this is going to be a problem. You're going to say, oh, this company is going into this industry, or they're trying to pivot from this to this, right? I've worked at both those companies. I know what it's going to be the challenge, right? If you're earlier in your career, like, even I am, right, where I haven't been a chief something for, a decade or two, what you can do is obviously draw on your own experience, but what's most important is obviously research. So don't necessarily research the company, research the industry. Start there. And I don't mean that as like a broad, easy out. It's just, so let's say we're talking about a marketing company that markets a food product, right? So look up like, what are new laws that might be coming in their state where they produce it, or in the country where they sell it. Like, is there a new something that's going to stop them from doing that? Is there going to be a lack of, like, right now, eggs, avocados, coffee beans prices, as we all know, are going way up. And so say that it's a food company. You could say, look, I know that one of your core ingredients is avocados in your frozen, happy, healthy meals. Here's two ways that we can either reduce the amount we use or subsidize the costs of avocados with this. And obviously, I'm not an expert here, but so you don't have to know the company's problems to know if they have avocados or eggs, or say it's a coffee company, right? Coffee beans prices are skyrocketing. So that's just one quick way to do that. And then you can get kind of niche into what the company does even more. So who's their target market? So we're going to figure, like, honest company, right? We figure out who their target market is. It's probably young parents, seems to be who they target. So it's like, well, what's their spending power? How is that changing? Who's competing for those dollars? Who's the up and comer? So a couple years ago, I would say Google this a bunch. Now ChatGPT will, like, I would type in ChatGPT, tell me who the competitors to Honest Company are. Find two established companies and two companies that are less than 2 years old that are gaining market share. That'll do that research for you. What this process will do is so when I say this will help your job search, so you ask ChatGPT or Google or whatever, what are these other companies? Apply to those companies. So, all right, so this is going to open your eyes to all of these other opportunities you didn't know about. Not that they're all hiring your exact job title, but as you're going from Honest Company and you're looking at lesshonestcompany.com, their competitor, or Honester Company, look at their career page. Look at who they're hiring. If they don't have your job, look for intel that you can add to the other company. You say, hey, look, Dishonest Company, they're hiring 20 AI people, or egg sorters, or whatever. I noticed this on their website. I think what this means is this, and you bring that to your interview. But as you do this research, you're going to uncover, I guarantee you're going to uncover companies that you don't know about, or you didn't know about, that maybe upstarts or startups or whatever. Apply to them. And now, not only do you have the intel to share with your company that you applied to, you can use that exact same intel and use it for the other companies that you just recently found and applying to. And all of a sudden, you kind of have this ecosystem where they're all going to be impressed with what you know, and maybe you can even start leveraging offers and counter offers. Not that that's the end goal, but this is what I've seen come to fruition through just any type of research, but applying it this way and wanting to give them all a little bit of intel. And whoever doesn't hire you, that's their problem. Don't worry about, like, it's not like you're uncovering top secret documents. You're just telling them what you've learned, and you don't want to seem sneaky, right? Like, hey, I checked the CEO's mailbox of your competitor, right? You're just saying, hey, this is what I'm learning. Like, my research is showing this company's growing their AI division. Is this on your radar, and how do you think this is going to affect you in Q3 of next year? whatever else. So hopefully not too long of an answer on how you can inject this. And this is how, right? What a surprise, right? And you've interviewed people too. You're partway through an interview, it's going well, and someone says, "Hey, I've noticed something about your competitor and like their growth or this or this. Like, is this on your radar? Because it's on mine, and I actually have a couple ideas on how we can approach this." One last thing I'll say is when you bring these ideas to the table, do so humbly and do so as ideas, not as fixes. So when I say solution, it's not that it's your solution or your new idea or the highway. This is something, just a thought of mine that I wanted to bring to the table, or this is something I've observed. Not, hey, your team screwed up your last marketing campaign. Hopefully they're not in the room, are they? Here's how I would do it, right? Here's a way to complement your current marketing campaign and actually piggyback off of that to perhaps capture this ancillary market over here. Things like that. So you never want to neg what they do. You want to help add to what they're doing.
Hmm. That's amazing. It's really interesting. I mean, every coach out there always talks about doing research on the company, but I don't think anyone really has so succinctly talked about what you do with that research. You research the company and the industry, and the way you described how someone, can now use that in their interview process, I think is really, really interesting. And that blew my mind, and I'm super intrigued to try to implement that myself. And that was super great.
Thank you.
If you could leave people with one tip for their interview, maybe something you haven't shared already, or maybe it is something you've shared, what's one thing that they can do today to just kind of, jumpstart their interviews?
I'm like, why choose one piece of advice when I could give 20? So what I'd like to do is actually go back to the tell me about yourself question because I
Okay.
know you coach on it. My process is that actually lays a foundation for your entire conversation, especially the beginning and end of the question, because you're confirming who you are, kind of what you're good at, getting a little personal. That stuff doesn't matter so much. You can tie back into it later if you need to. But then at the end, you're talking about why you're there. And again, that's the solution. And you're providing yourself as a or the solution to their challenge, their opportunities. It can be positive with a little negative. Prepare this, record your, like I would say, do a coaching session with Steph, learn everything you can. But if you're just listening to this and maybe that's not an option or not on your radar, record yourself answering this question, like just at the end of the podcast on your phone, put in selfie mode and try it. See what happens. When I coach, I'd say almost everybody stops about 10 seconds in and goes, crap. And this one's so hard. If that happens in your interview, it won't happen in your interview, but that thought comes to mind during a coaching session. 10 seconds into your interview, that same thing's going to happen. And from my observation, it's typically word salad after that. So my advice would be, and I hope this isn't vague, but just see how you do. Like try answering a question like that, not like all the way through. And use the cell phone not to rewatch, because if you're like me, it'll be too painful to rewatch yourself go through that answer, but use it for pressure because there will be more pressure for whatever reason when you just know that it's being recorded. See how you do. And my hope would be I want you to perform really well. I hope that you ace it. I don't think I could either. But if not, use that as a reality check. Just to even just refine that yourself. Like listen back to what Steph tells you on her podcast. Refine your answer. I like to write it out, script it out, even if it's just like part one, part two, part three, part four, right? Part one, just confirming who I am, a little like I am a XYZ professional from New York, New York. Really happy to be here today. A little bit about myself, my family, my healthy hobbies, my volunteerism. I'm here today because, right? Script it out like that. And don't go into your interview blind. Don't get blindsided. I've seen so many people, so many good people who they're already nervous and they start off on that wrong foot and it screws up their ability to recall answers later on because their nerves get spiked, their adrenaline gets spiked, and they think that they've it's okay to say screwed the pooch. They think they screwed it up right from the start. So nail that question and you will find yourself, don't stop your prep from there, but you will find yourself having an outline of things to talk about, why you're there, how you can help them as a foundation for the rest of your conversation.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you. And the two things I was just writing them down, the two things that I really took away from this chat is to reframe your interviews instead of showing up and just seeing what happens. It's really flipping that script and being the solution the company needs. And that's just going to boost your confidence anyways when you go into the room that way. And then also just like shorten your answers, make it more succinct and more powerful. I think those are two really big takeaways. And if anyone listening, I think you guys need to follow Matthew. He has so much great information to share. There are so many more questions that I could ask you today. So if people want to follow you and learn more about your work and your content, where can they do that?
You can follow me all across social media. However, I'm really bad at it. I'm trying to get really hard to get better. But if you want like good career advice, the best thing to do would be to subscribe to my podcast. It's called The Job Interview Experience. I have wonderful guests like Steph on that make it fun and exciting and bring in different perspectives, which I think really empowers listeners to connect with different types and different advice outside of mine. Every other week is a guest. Every other week is me going solo and digging into topics like these. You can also go to jobinterviewexperience.com where you can find your favorite podcast players, some videos, some resources, things like that. So that would be the best place to connect. If you're a social media person, you can probably find it that way, but you're probably gonna be like, why hasn't this dude posted in 4 weeks or whatever? So the podcast is where I'm most active, and then the website from there.
Perfect. Awesome. I will include those links in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me today.
So good to see you.